When I did, the football coach showed me how to pack up, where the old cups were thrown into a wooden crate. He pounded down the top. All of the cups were dumped into place. His fist was fairly large, despite his age, and I could tell that he still had some of his old strength left. The wooden top scraped against the sides as it was knocked into place, and he explained it all to me. "Smack this down like so, that way all the garbage can be tossed together and recycled." He pointed to the entrance where the locker room door was. "There's a storage area in there. Take the hover cart and load the crate on it. Dump the water and ice in the grass. Load the coolers on the cart. Put it all back there along with any unused cups. Questions?" he asked, and I thought it over, scratching under my chin as I ran through all the ways things could go wrong. "Sir, what if we run out of water during the games?" I asked the obvious question, and the old man replied, "First off, I work for a living. Don't call me sir. It's just Paul, or Coach Wills if you feel really fancy. Second, if you run out, you go get more. There's a hose inside the storage area. Fill her up and get back as fast as you can get here. Just keep the cups full." I will admit, humans are a mostly fastidious lot. They have elaborate self-care and cleanliness rituals, and to stink is a profound social gaffe. It is, from my observation, the clearest sign of having given up on functioning in society. So to hear Coach Wills say to fill up the containers with a hose? I tilted my head at him and asked him, "Are you joking, Coach Wills?" He crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked down at me for a long, quiet moment and said, "Listen here, these boys get sweaty, muddy, and thirsty enough to lick sweat out of your fur after the first hour or two. A little hose water won't hurt 'em." He spat into the mud. Didn't expect squeamishness from an alien that took a bite out of a perv. I scratched under my jaw and said quite truthfully, "Coach Wills, I can still taste a piece of him in the back of my throat, and it is awful." It was the right thing to say. The salty old man threw back his head and laughed hard enough that he drew Boatswain's attention from speaking with one of the other players. After Paul explained what I'd said, another round of laughter was picked up. One of the players removed their helmet and groaned, "I can hear the eat me jokes already." The player in question had a light-hearted tone, and I didn't take it seriously, nor did it seem that the others had either as they laughed it off, and in an attempt at joining in their laughter, I said in as deadpan a voice as I could manage, "Humans. Taste. Awful." I will not burden the Academy with the litany of jokes that followed, as most of them involved some form of reproductive reference that will not make sense to most species. Some forms of human humor don't translate very well, though it serves others well to learn its structure enough to imitate it. But I will point out that helmetless human who smelled a lot like sweat and was still flushed in the face bore a striking resemblance to Coach Wills. It was their positioning, really, the way they stood with one hand on the hip and the helmet under one arm, much the way he now held his datapad. They were laughing somewhat less than the others, perhaps because while the others were joking and laughing, socializing like very young Dlamisa before separation, the helmetless human took an interest in the old man's work. The football shirt uniforms, I should point out, had numbers on the front and names on the back, and I was pleased to see the last name Wills, largely because I was now fairly sure I was right. Son, grandson, or nephew, I suppose. The disinterest in the team and the interest in the old man's work reminded me of the way Percival guided Teresa. There is a word for this which is almost totally unique to humans: nepotism. Essentially, it is the promotion of family members into positions of authority in private or public enterprises, without regard for whether or not the person being put into that position actually has talent. I had to caution myself to make my notes somewhat tentative, as I couldn't be certain I was right, not without asking, and I didn't want to risk an insult on my first day. But I will say that in my study of human history, nepotism is the singular most common form of government and commerce. Children were raised in their family businesses. The ruler was chosen from among the children of the existing ruler. Wealth, land, goods, all would pass through generations of the same hands. I will pause to point out that this often worked surprisingly well. A child grows up learning specialized skills and then steps into the family business, having spent their life preparing for it. Unfortunately, there were those inevitable lapses of talent, accident, war, or worse, and inevitably most of the time it would fail. It was and still is frowned upon, but as evidenced by Percival, Teresa, and now at a glance, the Wills family, it lives on. I turned two of my ears toward their conversation and set myself to my own job. walking slowly to catch as much as possible about what was being said behind me. "It's fine, but if you don't change up the line, you'll be stuck when one of them gets hurt, and mind that the damn meatheads don't forget that they're student athletes." Then I lost track of the conversation as I went inside to get the hover cart. Cleanup proved easy. I set out the various plastic bottles of their multicolored flavored drinks, which the cheerleaders and players all paused to take. I got the feeling this was a regular thing for them, that it was how they ended every game. Humans need a lot of water to survive, and some specialized drinks provide not just water, but vital salts and electrolytes to replenish them faster. As I loaded the cart unassisted, a rare occasion when I would be given no help from those around me, I took note that the Wills pair and the cheerleading coach were standing aside and watching both groups, making sure that everybody finished the entire bottle. Nobody wandered away, and they all drank so fast and so deeply that I could hear their various gulps. I realized I was seeing another rule at play. It reminded me very much of the way William and Rebecca minded Fauve and ordered their household. Human leadership appears to be essentially parental, setting examples that subordinates are to follow. Only after the others drank did the young Wills approach and snatch up the last bottle for himself. I finished throwing everything together and hauled it away. The steel-gray cart hummed contentedly ahead of me, the little blue lights pulsing underneath. The work proved surprisingly easy. My only trouble was really with banging the crate top down for the cups. Physical work. It was not, is not, and never will be what I am best at. But I managed. I was just storing things away when I smelled Bosun and Lisa behind me. "You got everything? You good to go?" she asked as I straightened up. I put my hands on my hips and arched my back. "Yes," I answered. I was still a little sore from my earlier run-in with Bosun, and he lowered his tail and bowed his head as a second apology. I had no intent to break discipline that way. He repeated, and again I waved it away. "There was a ball involved. It was inevitable," I answered. "We might have to make exceptions to the usual rules for that kind of thing," I added, and this incidentally became the foundation of bally law after the sport spread, that injuries sustained or caused by the pursuit of a ball either by natural means or by incidental collisions shall not be subject to punishment or discipline unless the ball was put into play with the intent of creating those injuries. "So, Lisa, what's next?" I asked, content to give Bosun some space while he processed my dismissal. "Next, I shower, change, and head back. Make sure you check your schedule, download any books you need, and then I guess that's that. Are you going to do the classes in person or remote?" she asked, and my answer was quick. "In person." I said, "I need to get used to human crowds. A small one is best. Maybe I can get something to suppress my sense of smell to make it easier. But whether I can or not, I have to do it this way. My career depends on it." "You take that mighty seriously," she said when we left the storage room. "Of course. A Dlamisa has his work and not much else. We go to work, we go to sleep, we eat, we speak a little. But we work, and work, and work. To be the very best in my profession. Nobody has ever studied humans to this extent except my professor. If I'm successful, I'll be immortalized in my field for generations. To get there, I have to do everything in my power, even if it means taking a few lumps along the way." I tapped my finger to the spot above my eye she'd taken care of earlier. Bosun was looking at me with a new respect, his tail wagging and his head nodding with approval. Military Dlamisa are a rare breed, and they tend to be somewhat contemptuous of the cowardice of others, or what they see as cowardice. I suppose because of my natural timidity and my obvious fears, he hadn't thought much of me before that moment. But even if I am not the bravest of my race, I am and always have been ambitious to make my mark on my people's history, to rise to the top where I could say I mattered. It mattered that I was there in the time that I lived, and it was really the only way one of us was ever really known at all. In the years since, I was sometimes asked if I regretted the things I did that put so much at risk, that nearly cost me everything and reset my life to zero. I look back on the memory of Fauve standing between me and the security people, the memory of that first thrown ball, the memory of Michael chasing after me, of William and Rebecca's tight embrace. And I wished I could laugh like a human, because if I could, I would always add in that laughter when I say, even if it cost me everything, I would have done it all again without any regrets. It was worth it, because they and all they and so many more I have yet to even mention were worth it. The ride back after we were done with everything was perfectly ordinary, really. I didn't notice how much time had been lost, so I got my call to the embassy out of the way as quickly as possible, letting them know about the local military office wanting to do an exchange and have Bosun work with them. Nobody answered, but I left the information and forgot about it. My meetings with the ambassador were few and short, but he was one of us through and through, and a Dlamisa never passes an opportunity up when it has a low cost and a high yield. Bosun let out his loud roo the whole ride back to the hover bus, and when we got there, Lisa was quick to add, "Make sure you're not late for in-person classes. If you are, they'll lock not just the doors, but digital access. They hate lateness. Good to meet you." She put out her hand, and I clasped it with gentle firmness, making sure that my finger claws didn't rake over or poke her skin much. "And tell the family I said hello." "I will," I said, and grabbed the rail to pull myself up the steps to the top of the bus. Bosun followed, but he didn't speak. His nose was in his datapad, typing away as fast as he could. He wasn't nearly as fast as I, but he was adequate at least. He sat beside me, letting out happy roos most of the ride back. He drew substantial attention from those around him, most who watched with a mix of bemusement and amusement. Our dog-like faces and some of our mannerisms were clearly endearing to the passengers. I did catch a few people's whispered words when I was recognized as the one who attacked Wolfbeard. This favorable attention, even if it was a little crowded on the top of the bus, made the feeling of being surrounded a little more tolerable. It didn't hurt that Bosun's entire role was security, and he loomed over every human on the bus. It was strange, really. He loomed so large over most of them, but rather than intimidated, they found him, well, some of the words I overheard included, "Cute. I want to pet them. Aw." I'm sure it would have felt insulting except for the sheer and obvious fact that we really did look like some of their breeds of wolves and dogs. If I looked like a mix of Irish setter and golden retriever, Bosun was like a mix of giant Great Dane and giant Doberman Pinscher, one that had been given a lot of strength-enhancing drugs. Though his tongue lolling out of his mouth while he rooed and typed utterly destroyed any sense of ferocity about him. While we rode, I couldn't help but think I overstepped, talking to him about leaving here in a few years. Military Dlamisans don't tend to think in the long term the way most of our race does. They tend to focus on the more immediate, which isn't to say that they could not, only that their tasks lent themselves to more immediate short-term thinking. As such, I knew it hadn't completely hit yet, but it would soon. I was not looking forward to that day. When we did finally return to the Walker house as the sun started to set, I found the smell of coffee caressing my senses as soon as I entered the house, and I heard the sound of Michael clapping in time to a cartoon on his little child's datapad. Fauve was chatting with her father at the table while they played a game of cards with Byron and Rebecca. "How'd it go?" William asked. His slender face was not as good at disguising his sense of worry as he thought. It was sweet, really, in a way, to think of him concerned about me. "Fine. I'll be a water boy for the football team and an admin assistant in the office, and I'm enrolled in a few classes that will be starting soon. Also, they want him." I inclined my head toward Bosun, who immediately went to sit beside Byron, and the two fell into talking among themselves. Fauve approached and gave me a hug, her slender arm squeezing my a bit, her free arm going up to show the cup of coffee she'd made. "Come, sit. You know how to play Spite and Malice, right?" she asked, and I shook my head. I looked down at the table. There were seemingly random cards scattered around with 4 stacks in the center, with some cards up and some cards down and several more in long rows. No idea." I was telling the truth, and Fauve looked over to her mother and father. "Can we start again so that Bailey and Bosun can play?" she asked. "Sure, why not?" William answered. "Go ahead and explain the rules. I'll get dinner started," Rebecca said, and stood up to go into the kitchen area. "So it's like this," Fauve said while she began sorting out the cards into red and blue stacks. "Each person gets a stack of red cards, the top card always facing up so everybody can see it. The one to get rid of all their red cards first is the winner. We draw blue cards and try to build up the center from ace to king, and put our red cards down when we can. So if there's a 6 up in the middle, and you have a red 7, you want to put your red one there. But everybody knows what you need to play, so they try to block you by placing their own card down first. This is both spiteful." She paused, and shuffled the cards so fast they made a rapid swish sound as she bent her hands into an arch, and they slid together in a varied order. "And malicious." She finished with a wicked little smile on her face. "You draw 5 cards, Then end your turn by discarding them into one of 4 sequential columns that you make. And if you can't discard because you are out of columns or have nothing in sequence, you're probably going to get stuck, since you don't normally hold more than 5 cards in your hand. She began to deal out the cards. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I flipped up the top card from my red stack. It was an ace. "Ooh, easy first play," Fove said, and looked at the rest of us. William had a 4, Rebecca a king, Bosun and Byron both had 7s, and Fove herself had a deuce. On the surface, it looked like an easy play. But I was also last in the play order, being on Fove's left while the order went from her right side. Then Fove drew and slapped down 4 aces in a row. My auspicious start was gone, and the game did not get better from there. But I didn't care because while we played, slowly whittling down the number of cards in our stacks, they talked. So I learned about the equipment and how to use the sound dampeners, and Teresa gave me a manual her grandfather wrote. It's on paper and it doesn't leave the building, but it's supposed to teach me everything I'll need to know to work in their cooperation, Fove said, fairly dancing in her seat while she chattered on about what she was doing and learning, her hair bouncing around behind her. One would hardly believe what she'd been through so recently, and yet she seemed fine. "I'll tell her later," I told myself. I didn't want to ruin the day. I felt William's eyes on me. I felt his question and couldn't answer, so I focused on my cards and let the others talk. Along the way, in between turns, I typed up my observations. Cards is a fairly primitive form of game dating back centuries, with endless games played with the same tools, simple numbered cards with small designs on them. This is Spite and Malice was one such game. Its chief function is to facilitate casual socialization. Humans are so thoroughly social that they create games that have low stakes or no stakes just to have occasion to talk to one another more. This is especially true of families such as the Walkers, who seem to value their closeness greatly. William and Rebecca listened closely, listening, being another carefully cultivated skill, asking little questions along the way, making eye contact with their daughter, and letting her finish before they conversed with their own incidents of the day and their intentions for tomorrow. I lost the first game, and barely noticed before it became Byron's turn to shuffle, and he began rattling off a story about one of his tours of duty before dealing out the cards again. So the night evening went. The game only stopped when the smell of roasted stew filled the house, and the other guards were called in to come and eat at the table like civilized people. There we were, all of us, a pair of Dlamacin soldiers, a Dlamacin researcher, a human engineer, a scientist, a teenage girl with ambitions of media dominance and a human infant, chattering with a half a dozen different conversations before we even knew it. The taste of stew thick on my tongue, and the promise of just one more game after dinner before bed. Fove kept glancing at me, not saying anything in particular, but it felt off. I was fairly sure she couldn't have any idea about what my professor said, but it still felt off. If she had questions, though, she didn't ask them, instead excusing herself when William seemed to make a bottle of whiskey appear out of thin air. She knew well enough that liquor meant grown-up time was beginning, and gave enthusiastic goodnights to everyone before venturing up the stairs on her own. For my part, I watched her go and bade her goodnight as well. I wanted to follow her upstairs and tell her the truth. Part of me knew I should. However, all I could do was tell myself it would be a later. And when we finally ended the evening, I was slurring my words even in my own head, saying, "I'll tell her tomorrow." But before I even made it to my room, I was pretty sure I was lying.